This is They called him Sam Goforth, Samuel Cecil. He's raised in, well, he has lived in Tennessee, eastern Tennessee, between Chattanooga and Knoxville. And my dad told me about the furthest back I can remember. He told me was back just before the Civil War, about 2 weeks before the Civil War. They had a slave auction between Chattanooga and Knoxville, a little town. And they brought an old colored man in. It was real old. Nobody bid on him. And the war was about to break out, they thought. And they put him in with a load of hogs, and he brought 50 cents. Then his dad, Sam, said that they brought a young girl up there, about 16 years old, and she brought $1,100. They're using her for breeding purposes. And Paul said that turned to his brothers and boys, that's not right. It's not right to sell people like that. That's just not right. Well, 2 weeks later, the war broke out, and Paul said, I'm going to fight with the North. We got to free the slaves. His brother says, no, I'm not. So they partied. Thornton and Columbus go forth with his two brothers. Well, when the war, Grandpa had a farm with two girls. When Sherman's army came down, Daddy said that when the Sherman's army came down, they was burning every house, every barn, killing livestock that they didn't use themselves, the army didn't use. And they come to Grandpa's place. He wasn't in that particular army group. He is in the Northern Army, or not in that group. Grandma tried to tell them her husband was fighting with them, and they thought she was just saying it to save her home. She fought them, and they had to kill her. They killed her. She had a daughter about 7 or 8 years old and a little daughter about 3. Well, the daughter 8 years old remembered all that. And when I grew up, I knew Daddy's older sisters, his two sisters. The oldest one was bitter, very bitter. She's mad at the world. I know one time Daddy, the way she was so mad, Daddy threatened to slap her one time, stop her from saying things. But I can understand my dad explained to me about how bitter, why she was bitter. I could see it. And so after the war and he came back, they were still fighting. Daddy said he was about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and said, I sat on a horse in Bridgeville, Tennessee, a little country store up in the mountains. I sat on a horse and watched Paul fight they were still fighting over the Civil War. He was fighting with axes, clubs. And Daddy said, I saw men chop one another with an axe. But pardon me, I can't keep from crying about thinking about that, how bad it was. Sam Goforth brought his family, it was 5 boys and 1 girl, to Texas in 1880. And they said they landed at Garland, Texas. And it was Emory, Texas then. And then Duck Creek was down on a creek, a little community called Duck Creek. Well, they said that how Garland got its name was the 2 little communities. Garland was a little community, and Emory was a little community, and so was Duck Creek. They got to feuding and fussing. And old Colonel Garland, an Army colonel, came in and got them together and formed one town called Garland, and they named it after this old Army colonel. Garland was named after a Colonel Garland, an Army colonel. That's how it got a name. But anyhow, Daddy said after 2 years in 1882, his daddy died. I said, Daddy, what did he die from? What caused his death? And he said, disappointed. They come to Texas because there's gold here. Thriving place. They said it was poorer than Tennessee. It was worse than Tennessee, where they left. Another thing, they said he cried over the Civil War. He just sat down and cried all the time. They said that he died in 1882, And Daddy said that it was raining, it was so muddy, that men went along with axes and chopped mud out of the wheels of the wagon so they could get him to the cemetery there, south of Garland. Yeah, Daddy said then about a month later they moved down to that little two-room shack down in the White Rock Creek. And Daddy said how they made a living, they cut wood. There's a cotton gin at Reinhardt, a little community called Reinhardt, which was about not too far, 2 or 3 miles from them, on Garland Road there. And the cotton gin, and they said they cut a cord of wood for the cotton gin for 50 cents a cord. That's what they got, cutting wood. Cord for a whole cord of wood. That's lots of wood, 50 cents. But they said this was about along in the 1880s. He said they owed $3 to the country store there at Reinhardt. They went over to get groceries, and the grocery man wouldn't sell them groceries because they owed $3. And Daddy said that you ought to have our feelings. We're a bunch of young kids walking back home with nothing to eat. It's hungry. The point he was getting at was I got a jury summons when I was 23 years old. As I went to drive out, Daddy hollered and said, "Wait and hold up here. You be careful how you send some old boy to penitentiary." Daddy said, "A man will do lots of things when he's hungry." And Daddy said, "Be careful how you send some old boy to penitentiary. You be sure before you send him. He's not a mean man." And Daddy said, on the way back home, Daddy said, "I told my brothers, there's some robbers about half a mile up the creek where the road run to Dallas from Garland. Went across that creek. They said there's a couple of guys up there hiding under a bridge and they'll rob people. I've heard they rob people from Garland going to Dallas because they thought they had money." They said, let's brothers, let's go up there and see if we can see them. If we do, let's beat them up and see if they got $3 on them." And they said, we went up there and sure enough they were. And Daddy said, "Now I'll go across the bridge there and irritate them." And they said, "Then you boys, when I wave at you, y'all come on, we'll whip them." They said 2 men came out, and they said I knocked one of them down and knocked the other one down. And they said my brother just stood there cheering me. Not a one of them helped me. They said I whipped both 2 men. I found out then when I was about 15 years old that I could fight. I whipped 2 men, drug them down in that White Rock Creek, had water about ankle deep. He said we searched them. They said we got $3 for it. They had exactly what they had, $3. They said went back home and told them all, let's go back to that store and pay that man and get something to eat. And they said, "Ma wanted to know where we got the $3. We wouldn't tell her." Said she took a broom and I had to take the broom away from her. She was beating us up. Said she'd beat us to death if we didn't tell her where we got the money. We never did tell her. They said we went back and paid that man his $3 we owed him. And they said we got something to eat. But that was the hard times of the 80s. Daddy bought a farm and at 16 years old had put it in his mother's name because he wasn't old enough. And the other boys had married and left. That was in about 1891. I believe it was. Daddy was born in 1875. Or maybe it was, about 1891. He bought a farm and dug it out, stump at a time, at Garland on Miller and Jupiter. Now, a neighbor man, Mr. Rupert, had a hired hand. He was paying him $12 a month. He come down and helped Daddy dig stumps to get the land clear. Just started clearing the land, digging the stumps out and having a crop. And that was now in about 92 or 93. And then Daddy said he always drank a little bit. He began drinking and he got drinking pretty heavy. And he said he quit drinking and married in 1918. And all the time I was growing up, he was mad. I tell people don't mention whiskey around my dad because it'd take him 2 days to get through cussing it. He said he was mad because in first 40 years he lived, he was drunk and lived in the greatest country in the world, and I was drunk and had nothing. only that one farm there. And he wasn't working it too good. And he went to work. And then I was going to come along and born, and I was born in 1923, and he wanted me to take over. He should teach me how. Well, you know how I was. I was just a wild little kid. Hyper, they said. Grandma lived with us. She kept a broom. I got within broom lengths of her, she'd whack me with it. Mama said one day she was asleep in a chair, and I slipped up and got the broom and whacked her on the leg and dropped it and run. And Mama said that, you talk about mad. She was a mad woman. Now, Hannah Hill delivered us. Hannah Hill's a black woman. They lived on Ferndale Road and Northwest Highway on the northwest corner. 30 acres there. She was a slave of Will Caruth. They gave the land for SMU and had all that land over at North Park. And when the war was over, he freed her and gave her that 30 acres. Well, she delivered nearly all the kids around in the country. She was what they call a midwife then. And I think they paid her, I don't know what they paid her. I think they said they paid her $3 or $4 what it was for each kid that was born. It was something. But they would drop by, and when Daddy'd go to town here and Mama would go to Dallas, they'd drop by and leave me with her. When I was a little kid, I was afraid of her. She'd look at me hard and I'd simmer down. She had 2 boys named Dude and Commodore Hill. Now that was in the 20s, but back before that, my mother lived there her name was Rose. She lived there across the road from Hannah Hill. Northwest Highway and Ferndale Road on the northeast side of the road. That's where Mama was raised there. Well, she was born in Comanche, Texas, but they moved there as a young girl. And that's how Mama knew Hannah Hill so well. Mama said she met the Goforth boys up there, and they'd come up there on the Flagpole Hill, and they'd make a wheel. Now this was back in about 1908 to 1910. They'd make a little frame on 2 wheels and roll it down that hill and see who could stay on it before they'd fall off. Mama said she'd go up on that hill and ride with it. She met the Goforth boys up there on that hill riding those little old wheels down it. And funny thing, and Daddy finally bought that land, at Flagpole Hill and White Rock Lake. And Daddy had bought that land just before he went to work for White Rock Lake, bought it. And they paid him enough to pay for the land. He had 85 acres in that lake, White Rock Lake there, and 30 acres up on Flagpole Hill. Well, they wouldn't buy Flagpole Hill. There was no Rock Hill, wouldn't grow nothing. They sued him and made him buy it. He got $100 an acre for that 30 acres. Daddy thought that was some money. Every time we passed there, Daddy said, "Dave, I sold it for." Sued Dallas, made them buy it for $100 an acre. Big deal, wasn't it? But Daddy's brother first bought the land, and he drank it up, and Daddy bought it from the loan company, from his brother, which the loan company took it from his brother, and Daddy bought it from the loan company. And that's where I worked. I really grew up on Lake Highlands on that Lake Highlands when it first started there, where Hexter School is. That was the first land that we had there. And then we started buying land where Hill Junior High is. Right under that Hill Junior High is sitting on a gravel pit. The city Earl Hart was the head of White Rock Lake, was in charge of it. And he had dug and found gravel there. He was hunting on gravel to gravel those roads around White Rock Lake, that road. And he found gravel right there about right where Hill Junior High is. I couldn't believe it, and they built that school. I said, good, Len, that's 50 foot deep, some places there. They dug gravel out, because they took the money from that and started buying land going. Now, I was saving money in the 40s through high school to buy me a 40 model Ford when I graduated from high school in 1940. I had $700. His daddy had 16 acres of land there next to his house. He said, that's yours. You're all through high school, but you work it. You don't hire no labor, only cotton picking. You do all the other. Well, I'd put 8 acres in cotton, make 4 bales. The daddy says raise cotton. Texas, he said, was a dry state. It don't rain too much in Texas. Only one thing will grow in Texas every year, and that's cotton. Unless it rains too much. Too much, you won't make as much cotton as you will staying drier. They said you'll have a crop and you can live with cotton. But he said the other crops, you're just lucky to have a good crop, like corn and oats. And they said, well, I put half of it in corn and oats and half in cotton. And I had that 700 acres. Then I started buying mules. I had a couple of little small mules, looked just like you couldn't tell them apart. Everybody, men back in that day, were just like boys today. They wanted 2 mules that looked alike. I sold those mules for $250. That man offered me $150 and I wouldn't take it. He offered me $200 and I wouldn't take it. They said, I'm gonna whip you if he makes you another offer and you don't take it. That's ridiculous. You can buy mules for $25, $30. That was depression. He offered me $250 and I took the $250. They said, there's other mules, there's more mules than those 2. I miss the colored people that worked for us. We had about 10 families. Every time they would buy a place, the house, he'd move a black family in there, and it worked for us. Black families would work. Black people would work. They said some white people will, not too many of them will. But they were good people, those black people. No kidding about it. I liked them. They still visit with me. I call them. They even call me from Jackson, Mississippi. One lives there. I like those people. We had a lot of fun in the cotton field. Talking to them, I enjoyed what they said. Nobody can describe anything like a black person. But we got along good. We'd go down to White Rock Lake there. Johnny Williams had a boathouse down there. He boat rides, and he had the Bonnie barge, a big barge for parties. Back in the 30s. And we had Daddy bought woods, 30 acres of woods in Rowlett Bottom, where the bootleggers lived, where the bootleggers made more whiskeys made in Rowlett Bottom than any place in the world. They bought 30 acres of just woods, and we go down there and first cold spell and cut wood. All the black people, each one of us take a wagon, cut it in poles and bring it back and drop it, and then they'd take an axe and cut their wood up as they used it. And cutting wood, and I knew all the bootleggers. They'd all come up. They knew my dad. In fact, one of them was the first man electrocuted in Texas, Pete Wilkes, there in Rowlett Bottom. Had a gun battle there with the sheriff. One deputy sheriff was killed. He was killed with a .45 pistol, and Pete Wilkes was the only bootlegger that had a .45. The others had .38s. So they had Pete in jail. Well, his lawyer had a good case, he thought, clearing, because one of the deputies, he said the lawyer was going to prove that one of the deputies was going with the other one's wife, and that's why the other deputy had a good chance to kill him in that raid. But he said, I could get him out on that, but Pete Wilkes' wife bakes a cake, and she put a pistol in the cake. They carried it up to him in his cell. He got that pistol out, and the jailer came. He told the jailer to unlock his door, and the jailer turned and threw the key out the window. And Pete shot him through the bars. That was a stunt. See, he couldn't escape there. And that's how Pete got the death penalty for killing the jailer. He was electrocuted. Well, when they electrocuted Pete, brought him back to Rowlett there, we went to the funeral and they had a number 3 tub there, and he was pitching in money for his widow. He had about 6 or 7 kids, and that tub was running over with money. And I stood there as a little kid, thinking, man, that's lots of money. Ooh, a tub full of money. That's something. But that was the story of Rowlett Creek. Back in that day, there's no hamburger stands. They called them sandwich shops. I didn't know what a hamburger was till after World War II. Sandwich shop. He'd had a sandwich shop, and on Friday nights, he had prize fighting there in Rowlett. He'd have that so he could sell his whiskey, his bootlegging whiskey. Had prize fights and that. Anybody'd fight. 2 little kids would fight for 10 cents or a nickel. Grown men would fight. Well, Daddy had a black man named Richard Pollard that was quite strong, quite a fighter. In fact, I had him to come out and work for Daddy. He come out to visit our colored people, and he got drunk, and I rode his horse as a little kid. Daddy was shucking corn, and he come and got on Daddy about riding his horse. He said, I didn't ride your horse. Well, I stood there listening. I thought, well, I rode his horse. He didn't like it because somebody rode his horse while he was drinking. Finally, Daddy picked up that bucket of corn, knocked him down, and whipped him pretty good. He come back in, wanted a job, and Daddy hired him. He raised a family in a place. He lived with us 40 years, Richard did. Daddy carried him over prize fighting on Friday night, and he knocked another man, a black man, out in the first round. They said, Richard, play with him a while. Quit knocking him out. You'll get where nobody will fight you. They brought a prize fighter down from Greenville to fight him. Used to fight professional. He was dancing around and warming up in the ring, and old Richard got in the ring, pulled on the ropes, and that prize fighter got out of the ring and wouldn't fight him. That was a $15 fight. It was back in the Depression. Richard's getting $1 a day. Well, that was 2 weeks' work. Richard nearly cried on the way home. They said, I told you, Richard, to quit knocking people out so quick. I told you to play with them all. Now nobody will fight you. Richard said, if you'll hire me some training, Mr. Goforth, you hire me some training, I can whip Joe Louis. I'll fight Joe Louis. They said, no, you're getting out of your league now, Richard. You're a little bit old for that. But our black people was Richard. We saw him, Betty and I did, my wife and I did, back in Kroger's there on Plano Road here a few years ago. He was an old man. I heard him holler, oh, Miss Betty. He saw my wife and he picked her up. He said, oh, Miss Betty, why don't you and Mr. Dave go up here around Greenville and buy some more land? Let's get back like we used to. He said, we haven't been happy since y'all sold this land here at Lake Collins. We just not treated well now like we were treated back in that day. He said, let's get back like we used to. I said, Richard, we're too old. We can't do it. That day's over. But I enjoy those people. I enjoyed them, every one of them, as black people. It's just like meeting your old people, to see them, hear them talk, cut up. Yeah. One time, Mr. Byer there asked me if I was going to sell out my home on Church Road. I had that pretty place there on Church Road and a riding stable. I run a riding stable there. I bought this riding stable out and had to operate it after I bought it out. There, right beside of Lake Highlands High School. Mr. Byer come down, he says, you go to sell your property? And I said, I don't know whether or not I don't want to, Mr. Byer. I like this place so well, I might just take it with me when I leave here. I walked back in the house and Mildred, a black woman, was ironing for us. She laughed. She said, Mr. Dave, I heard you tell that man what he said to that man. Said, you take his farm with you and you get up there and the Lord give you a hoe and make you a hoe in about 1,000 years. You wish you left it here. I said, Mildred, you got a point. You got a good point there. I'll just leave it here. Mildred Hubbard, she come to work for us with her 3 kids. And then she bought a place down on Church Road and Skillman. Her husband worked for the city of Dallas on the street, patching streets. He was a worker. He was a hard worker. She said that she was talking about how people talked about how mean your dad, how tough your daddy was on people. She said, I worked for your daddy for 35 years, and he never looked at me with a mad eye. And she worked for us, for me and my wife. She's great. All the black people were great. Old Angel, Daddy made Angel foreman. He drank heavy, about 6'6". He picked cotton there on Lake Highlands, right on that land overlooking the lake. We had another black man to come with 3 boys, and they were pretty smart aleck boys. And one of them challenged old Daddy called Angel. He named him Angel. And everybody said, "What do you call him Angel for, Mr. Campbell? He's everything but an angel. He's just mean." Well, that's why Daddy named him Angel. To handle all those 10 families in the field. And he was a hard worker. And they picked cotton. They challenged who one pick gets all the money. That's pretty good money. I had much money then, several dollars. Mr. Dave will weigh the cotton. I said, "I'll weigh the cotton and empty the sacks for you. I'll weigh the cotton and empty the sacks. And then he said, then will you judge who picks the cleanest cotton in case we tie?" "I'll do that," I said. I emptied Angel's sack one time. There was a bowl of cotton with a little stem on it, about 6 inches long. I said, "Look here, Angel, I got a bowl, green bowl, and a stem." He said, "You won't see but one, Mr. Dave. I remember when it hung on the sack." He was picking them so fast he wouldn't take it out of his sack. But Angel picked 623 pounds of cotton, and Palmer's boy picked 613 pounds of cotton. That's how close that both those picked. That's picking cotton. That's not pulling bowls. That's actual. From daylight to time of daylight the next day, from time you could so the sun started up, the time it went down, last you could see. That's how long they picked from sun up to sundown. We'd average a half a bale to an acre. As I went to town, went to that little gym. Before I got there was a bunch of little houses, and a bunch of boys, they knew me. They'd come out and throw rocks at me. I'd stop before I'd get there and put rocks in my cotton, and I'd get behind them when I'd get throwing rocks. I'd put them back in the house. And Gin Man one Saturday told Daddy, he says, "Mr. Goforth, you got some people putting rocks in their sack." Daddy said, "No, I haven't either. They won't do it. I know them, know all. Come around here and let me show you a week's supply of rocks we're getting out of your cotton." There was a pile of rocks. I could identify every rock that I picked up. It'd sift, going to the gin, it'd fall down through the cotton. And Daddy says, "Wait till I get back, I'll find out who's putting them rocks in." Those black men would cry, they nearly cried, "Mr. Cameron, we're not putting rocks." I was afraid to tell Daddy it was me, because I know he'd whip dickens out of me. When you've been slapped out of a chair, you sort of calmly around your dad. You try to be. One time I threw a biscuit across the table at my sister, which she was Daddy's girl. All girls are Daddy's girls. She asked me to pass her the biscuits, and I wouldn't do it. Daddy says, "Dave, pass her the biscuits," and I just picked up one and threw it. And boy, he come backhand, I went from over the chair. He never bawled me out. He never acted like he hit me. He never said a thing. He just kept eating. Mama did too. I got up and picked up the chair and got up back to the table, and I've been passing biscuits ever since. But so to say, I was afraid to tell Daddy I was throwing rocks at these boys. But I did quit throwing rocks at those boys. And the little things like that. Now, Grandma's a good story on Grandma, Daddy's mother. When she lived at White Rock Lake, she got her a buggy, had one horse. There's a little country store there where Hannah Hill lived on the Northwest Highway, and Ferndale Road was a little country store. A bunch of men was there one Saturday morning. Daddy said, a whole big bunch. And here come Grandma through there. And she couldn't get through the men, so many of us men, a little old narrow road. And they said, "Well, I reckon we want to let this old lady through here." Well, Granddad said Grandma picked up, she was by herself. She picked up that long buggy whip. When she got through, men was running up the road. She cleared the road. Those were the days. They don't. That day's gone. But those stories were true stories my dad tell me in the field. There's a sandwich shop there at Frankfort Hill, little whatnot shop. They sold a little bit of everything. I sold a fishing pole, sandwiches, and I don't know what all. I remember in Dallas, they had Rockefeller. First hamburger I ever heard was Rockefeller hamburgers. That was during the war, after the war, in World War II. In 1940, Rockefeller hamburgers. And we thought that was something because they sold those hamburgers 10 cents a piece or 3 for a quarter. I was telling my wife about it, and she said, well, that's how I live when I come to Dallas. She come to Dallas and got her a job. She was paying $10 a month, $10 a week, a room rent, and had to share it with another girl. She got a job at Sears and Roebuck. And every 2 weeks, she got $37.50 take home pay after everything was taken out. And $20 of that $37 was for room rent. And then she had $17 or something to live on. And she said that hadn't been for Rockefellers, her and her roommate would go, they wouldn't sell you 3 hamburgers to 2 people. They just sell them only to 1 person. She said, so every other night, one of us would go down and get those 3 hamburgers at Rockefeller's, 3 hamburgers for a quarter. Plate lunches at then back in the 40s, we married. Plate lunches was 25 cents. If you got pie, it was 35 cents. Pie and coffee, if you got that pie and coffee. But 25 cents for just a normal plate like you pay now, $7 or $8. A lot of difference in that. I played around on White Rock Lake there on that hill there. We'd go, a bunch of us boys would go down. Our big deal was when I was a kid, see who could ride their horses the furthest out in White Rock Lake, make them swim the furthest. And then we'd slide off the back of the horse and grab their tail, let the horse swim, pull us to the bank. That was a big deal for us. Daddy heard about it, and he said, I'll beat the devil out of you if I catch you in that lake again. But we got to where I could trick Mama. Mama's a won't whip sons. A boy is Mama's pet. All boys are nearly. And I'd tell them, she said, you been in that lake? No, Mama, I've been running my horse, it's hot. I'd throw dust all over my horse, where Mama wouldn't notice it too well. But Daddy could come in, look at that horse, 400 yards, and he'd start cussing. I told you to stay out of that lake. That's before he ever got close to me. But that was the deal. White Rock Lake was something back then. I can say I was partial to it because Daddy sold all the gravel around and for all those lakes around to Earl Hart. That was something. And then we sold feed to the men, to old man Hunt, H.L. Hunt, lived on the other side. I went up there and we sold feed for their horses. They kept some horses up there, 3 or 4 horses. But Hunts and all them back in the Depression days, 30s, all rich men were guarded in the 30s. They had men guards around their house with shotguns. And we'd carry a load of oats up there to hunt all these other guys. Well, a man would come out to me with a shotgun and he'd give us the money. And stand there, he didn't point the gun at us, he just stand there holding his hand talking to us while we was unloading oats. And Daddy said, you know, I hate to stand and let a man be standing by me with a shotgun, but Dave says, Dave, that's cash. You know, everywhere else I'm selling oats and all, I have to take their note and they never pay me. But Dave says, sell to these wealthy men over here, they'll pay you cash. And Mr. Hunt, I know, would look at me and I'd tease him. He'd tell me, he said, Mr. Goforth, that boy of yours might mount to something if he'd cut out that foolishness. I'd tease him. And I teased him all my young life. I knew Mr. Hunt, knew him quite well. You know, when Kennedy was killed in 60, I believe it's, I forget, 63, I believe. 1963, newspapers, the liberals sort of hinted that Hunt caused it because he had that lifeline program of running down Kennedy. I mean, he, just like who's the guy now that's running down everybody, all the Democrats on radio, on TV?
Limbaugh.
That old boy that really does the talking. But Hunt had that type of program back in when Kennedy was president, and they claimed that he probably swayed this Oswald to kill him. Well, he didn't sway Oswald to kill him. It wasn't Oswald. Probably never heard of Hunt. But we were sitting up there one night. Miss Hunt gave a party, and my wife was invited, the families, and sat down on the front porch. And I said, Mr. Hunt, did you kill Kennedy? He wouldn't really answer me. He just stand around and look at me, stare at me. I said, Dallas News said you killed Kennedy. He didn't say it. They just sort of insinuated that it was that would do it, sway up with his Lifeline program. I teased him quite a bit, but if I'd had any sense, I'd have got in with him. I could have got a good job from him and everything. But I'm happy with what I was doing.